Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you are, and welcome to another episode of Take the Points, a true underdog podcast. Hey everybody, how's it going? You have Robbie here, and as you can tell, I am flying solo. Jason Derulo style over here. Steve and Wilson are both busy with their fancy lives and are unable to join tonight. Everyone's got a busy week, but wanted to make sure we got on here and got you some content. We had a nice last summer break last week, so we were not on the pod. Wasn't a ton going on, so hope you guys were okay with us taking a week off, but we are officially back this week, and we will be back on a regular basis moving forward with football season officially upon us and on the horizon here. Hard to believe that it's week 0 already coming up this weekend in college football, which it doesn't feel like it's football time yet just because of the weather, but man, can we pick a better week 0 in college football? It just, it's like the opening round of the NCAA tournament, the play-in games. That's what this weekend feels like when you label it week 0, which I understand. Feels like we probably should just start at week 1, maybe push it back another week, but who's going to turn down college football? I know I'm not going to. And we know the NFL is upon us. We have training camp going on. Lions are 3 games into their preseason with 1 more to go coming up this weekend. So today on the pod, what are we going to talk about? Again, going to be solo today. Probably hoping to be on here 40, 45 minutes, but we'll see how much I like hearing myself talk, which is generally a lot. So let's see. What are we going to talk about? One, we're going to start with the Michigan scandal and the weak-ass punishments that were handed down last week on Friday. I want to talk about those. Steve's not here. He's pulling a Harbaugh. He doesn't want to talk about it. Was afraid to come on this podcast today, which I completely understand. It's tough when it's been acknowledged that you obviously did something wrong from a school perspective. I'm sure he'll have some thoughts to share when he gets back on the pod next week. But of course, we have to start with the Michigan scandal. I just want to give some of my general thoughts really on the NCAA and just the overall punishment that was handed down. Again, not a Michigan man, not a Michigan State man. I'm a Miami of Ohio man. So anything that comes out of this mouth is something that's not going to be biased. It's going to be focused on what I think is hopefully an unbiased opinion. And we'll start with the Michigan stuff. I do want to jump into some Lions training camp, kind of top of mind. What's been going on with Lions training camp? What are some questions coming out of camp? Not much to really talk about with the Tigers. They're 7-3 in their last 10, which is great. Won 3 or 4 for Minnesota. They got a big series coming up this week. I'll be at one of the games. Tigers facing the Houston Astros, and they're kind of battling out right now for that first and second best record in the AL. So, but again, not a whole lot to cover there. We've done a ton of Tigers content this year, so it's about that time we kind of officially transition into college and NFL football. So that's what we're going to cover today. I don't know why I say we're, because it's just me. So yeah, that's what me, myself, and I are going to talk about today. So let's start with probably the biggest news that we've had in the last 2 weeks coming from a sports perspective out of the Detroit and Michigan area. It is the conclusion, or so we thought the conclusion, of the Connor Stallion saga and the Michigan cheating scandal. So let's kind of give a summary of what happened here. So the NCAA, I think it was last Thursday, came out and said we're going to officially release the punishments for Michigan for the Connor Stallions cheating scandal. It got released, I believe, Friday morning. There was a press conference held at noon, and then pretty much all local sports media picked up on it starting on Friday. So just for those that may be living underneath a rock, just to confirm here what happened with this Connor Stallion situation. So this scandal really centered on kind of an elaborate in-person scouting operation that was run by, at the time, a Michigan staffer, Connor Stallions. Again, I want to note here, this was really premised around the idea of sign stealing, but let's be clear that it's not illegal to do sign stealing, but there is a bylaw that the NCAA has that prohibits in-person, off-campus scouting of future opponents. That is considered an unfair competitive advantage. So let's just start there before we even get into the punishments of this. Anybody that says, listen, this wasn't cheating, everybody does it, Michigan just got caught, I think is absolute BS. Michigan cheated. Period. There's no other way to define what happened here. Michigan had an elaborate scheme, and people can say it was just Connor Stallions. He was actively gathering video in an elaborate way, which we will cover, of other teams' signals, then analyzing them, and then essentially sitting on the sidelines of a Michigan game, communicating with the coaches on what was the other team was essentially going to be calling. If you don't think that's cheating in a competitive advantage, then I don't know what to tell you. I think my ask this entire time for Michigan fans has been just acknowledge it. Acknowledge that it was cheating. It doesn't take away the fact that you won the games. The NCAA clearly didn't come down hard enough on you, but it is what it is. You got the natty, walk away, and just be done with it. To me, it's this unwillingness, I guess, for Michigan fans. I don't want to speak for all Michigan fans, but those that I've heard on local radio, some of my friends as well, just really that refusal to admit that this was cheating. Again, two kind of separate arguments here. Do I believe that Michigan had an unfair advantage by actively video recording and having a staffer analyze other teams' signals in preparation for the game and then sit on the sideline and communicate with the head coach, the defensive coordinator, and the offensive coordinator? Yes, I do believe that that is cheating. Now, with that said, there's also a whole nother side of this, which is just the hypocrisy of the NCAA and all of this, trying to act like they have any leg to stand on when it comes to integrity. So let's go through kind of the punishments that got handed out here. So like I said, Connor Stalions was at the core of this, but essentially the NCAA found that Michigan committed several violations here. And let's just kind of start with what the penalties were. So essentially, Michigan here was hit with mostly financial punishments here. So the penalty, essentially what I think is ultimately going to happen here, it's kind of difficult to kind of see what the total amount is but the forecast is probably going to be around $20 to $30 million of overall fines. So it's a $50,000 fine, a fine equal to 10% of the football program's annual budget, a fine equivalent to the anticipated loss of all postseason competition revenue sharing from 25 and 26. That's obviously at the end of the year because of the postseason, all the money they made, checks gets distributed to the universities. Michigan will not be eligible for that for the next 2 years. And a fine equivalent to the cost of 10% of scholarships awarded in the football program for the 25-26 academic school year. There's also recruiting ones. There was a 25% reduction in official football visits during the 25-26 season, and a 14-week prohibition on recruiting communications for the football program during the probation period. So how about the individual penalties that got handled out? So that's what got handed to Michigan. I'm reading this off here, so bear with me. There's a lot of information, and I cannot pronounce the word probation or prohibition period because it just something is not coming out of my mouth right there, so I'm not even going to act like I'm saying the word right. But okay, so what were the individual penalties? So Connor Stalions, right, the quarterback, pun intended there, of this entire issue, received an 8-year show cause order. So that essentially, anyone knows a show cause, essentially he cannot have a job in the NCAA for the next 8 years. Jim Harbaugh received a 10-year show cause order. It's particularly lengthy. It won't begin until August 7th, 2028, which is when his 4-year show cause from a previous unrelated recruiting case expires. So let's be real. Harbaugh said, I am out. He knew the shit was crumbling. He didn't want to be stuck in the house. He got out. Talk about that later. Sharon Moore, current active head coach of the Michigan Wolverines, received a 2-year show cause order. So outside of working for Michigan, he cannot work for another school in the NCAA for the next 2 years. I doubt it matters because he's not going to go anywhere. And then he also received a 3-game suspension. Michigan had already given him a 2-game suspension self-imposed this year. The NCAA, again, very odd here, said, okay, we'll just give you another game for the next year. So not all 3 games are going to be in one specific time frame. And then Denard Robinson received a 3-year show cause order as well. This was really more for his recruiting violation. So that's kind of a summary, a lot of word vomit there of kind of what happened here. A couple of key things that I want to talk about that I think is important that we call out and don't just skip over when it comes to when it comes to this entire scandal. So really it came out that Stalions and Harbaugh, they were found to have committed level 1 violations, of course, for their intentional destruction and withholding of materials and information. So the reality is we know Harbaugh was involved here and Connor Stallions were involved. They were dealt the biggest blow of anything. Again, who else knew about it? What else was going on? Did I read all 35 pages of the NCAA investigation? No, I didn't. I don't think anyone wants to come on here and hear me talk about that. You're really looking for an opinion here and just what my overall take is on this. This was an extremely light penalty, in my opinion, for what it could have and should have been based on what Michigan committed. They cheated. They got caught cheating. They didn't cooperate. The head coach left. End of sentence. Not really sure what else to say more than that. There's been discussion here around, well, they couldn't really figure out, did it create an unfair advantage? I mean, come on. You knew the other team's plays. You knew for the most part what they were running. You had other schools that were literally not even or changing their signs before the game because they knew that something was going on. There's no way in my mind you can say that this did not give Michigan a competitive advantage. With that said, they still went out and won the games. Who knows those last couple games of the year, if that was even in play. They won the Natty. The NCAA, again, was never, based on this report, was never going to even consider removing any type of win violations records because of this scandal. I don't know another word to say other than scandal. What I think is really interesting here is this failure to cooperate for Connor Stallions and Jim Harbaugh. The report noted that Stallions' actions were some of the worst this committee has ever seen, and that Harbaugh ran a program that was largely dismissive of rules compliance. What I just want to outline here is I think it's fascinating that there's been this separation of kind of Michigan punishment from Harbaugh and Connor Stallions punishment, which I find is extremely, extremely odd. This, to me, based on what kind of came out from the NCAA, pretty much says, hey, if you cheat, maybe you're not really going to get punished other than a fine, which leads me to kind of my second point of this outside of the Michigan angle of this, which, again, hopefully Steve comes on here and argues me on, was it cheating, was it not cheating? I will go to my grave saying this was cheating based on the definition of what I believe cheating to be. Again, you want to get an argument, would they have won, would they not have won? The reality is we will never know. There's an asterisk on this for me no matter what happens here. I don't have any spilled milk over this. I'm not a Michigan fan. I'm not a Michigan State fan. I'm just a fan of a game of integrity, and I don't think that happened here. My biggest issue with this entire scandal here is the NCAA. The NCAA is just full of hypocrisy and just does not have a backbone. We've seen this with NIL, right? Kind of the confusion around NIL. You got kids jumping all over the place. The horrible rollout that has been. And I just think the NCAA has had multiple opportunities. For those that don't know, there was kind of a similar issue that happened with Tennessee. I believe it was a couple of years ago for Tennessee, as they got essentially issued with, I think, the most ever. I think they had 18 level 1 violations and over 200 visual infractions over a 3-year period. And again, they were given a fine as well. This was more recruiting, right? They were hotels, meals, entertainment, medical bills, etc. Side note, I separate out what Michigan did very, very differently than recruiting violations. If this was a recruiting violation, totally good with it. This was the integrity of the game violation, which is why I have such an issue with it as such an avid sports fan. But I don't want to act like I'm above the law. I just ask that teams, you want to bend the rules a little bit? Fair. This was more than bending. This was absolutely breaking the rules. But when it comes down to the NCAA, if you read the report, part of the report came out and said, because people have been asking, why didn't Michigan get with a postseason ban? And the report even said, hey, we felt like we could have given a postseason ban, but it felt like it would have been punishing the current athletes versus those that were involved. Just when you think about that, so if I have a school and I want to win a natty, I'm going to bring in a coach, pay him a ton of money. We're going to win the natty. Coach is going to leave. Assistant coach is going to leave, right? Or staff or whatever it is. They get caught for cheating. Guess what? They carry all that cheating with them. And outside of a small fine, the school doesn't have to pay any consequences. I just don't understand that. That to me is insane, because if this was an academic issue, if this was cheating on a test, look out, right? NCAA would have hammered down on Michigan, and they really would have felt it. But they essentially gave a slap on the wrist, and they gave a fine, $30 million. Do we really think that $30 million is going to be hard for the University of Michigan to make up? I mean, come on. The NIL deal that they just gave to their quarterback was like $10 million. This is exactly what Michigan, I think, alum kind of are okay with. Look at Dave Portnoy after this came out. He's smoking his cigar, sitting on his dock, right? Saying, whatever, we'll find the money. It is what it is. I'm a Michigan man. We won the Natty. I get it. You want that arrogance? I got no problem with it. I just think, again, this is the failure of the NCAA, and this is just one of many examples of where they failed. Like I said, NIL. If you look at just the conference realignment that's happened in the NFL, or I'm sorry, in college football. College football has become about one thing and one thing only, and that is money. I know it's always been about that, but there was still, you look at even 5 years ago before this NIL got rolled out, there was still an integrity and authenticity to the game, right? I think that's just been absolutely lost. I don't put that on the players. Go get paid. I'm all about them getting paid. I think that's great. I'm a former college athlete myself. Probably wouldn't have gotten any NIL deals in cross country, but you never know. Maybe a running shoe company out there, right? Maybe some goos that people take in marathons, maybe a little singlet action, maybe some running hat and sunglasses. I would have taken a couple $100. I'm all about athletes getting paid. I think it's worth it. Again, this whole hypocrisy in college football around, well, you get your scholarship and that's enough value for you. Meanwhile, the schools cashing checks on your back from an athlete perspective. So I don't want to pretend that college sports is something that it's not. But this is where the NCAA just has no backbone. This shows me they do not have any ability to truly restrain or to really rule or manage anything in college sports, because everything around them is moving faster and is bigger than they can handle. And this was just another example, because again, I think they were scared in this situation. There's a lot of Michigan people in a lot of high places. It is what it is. Again, they still got punished. It's not like they weren't punished at all. They just were punished in an area of strength for them, which is monetary donations, right? That's really was the slap on the wrist for this. And to top it off, Michigan might be appealing this. I heard Doug Karsh today talking on the radio. He's the voice of Michigan along with John Jensen, talking about the fact that, they don't believe that everything presented was accurate and they don't want to pay the fines and everything. If I'm a Michigan fan and I'm Michigan, walk away from this. Take the fine, walk away, accept what happened. You already accepted that this did happen, right? Walk away. Why are we going to prolong this anymore? Hopefully this story is dead, because I honestly just don't want to hear about it anymore. But just from a pure athlete perspective, having been a former NCAA athlete myself, I think a lot of the bylaws and the regulations that we even saw 10, 15 years ago as I was an athlete versus what you see now, it's just dramatically changed. And I look at the motivation in college sports, and again, it's centered around one thing, which is around money. The players are motivated by the money. That's where they choose what school they want to go to. The schools themselves are motivated by money, right? How can I make the most ticket sales? How can I be the best team I can be to get the most people in, to make the most money so then I can be strong in NIL? The conferences are all motivated by money as well. And I'm not saying money's a bad thing. I'm not trying to live in some utopia scenario in some, utopian world of everybody just wants to go there and have a good old time. And that's what we're all out for. I get it. We're all trying to make money. But there is some, pureness to sport. And I think college sports has lost what little of pureness existed. Am I still going to tune in on the weekends? Yes. Am I still going to watch college football? Of course. I'm not going to walk away from the game. But do I have the same love and affection that I had for the game previously? No, I don't. If you were to ask me right now to name 10 players on Michigan State's football team, I could not do it. You asked me to name 10 players on Michigan's football team, I could not do it. You want to go back 5 years ago? Yeah, I probably could have done it. And at that point, I had a lot of other stuff in life going on, but I would have been able to name those players. And that's just something kind of that I think we've lost in college football. And where this all comes back to, before I go off on a complete tangent, is to me just the need for the NCAA to either play their part or get out of the way. Because what you're eventually going to see happen is just these conferences are going to take over, because why do they have to listen to the NCAA? They got more money than the NCAA. They're the whole reason that the NCAA exists, right? And we know football is king. Football and basketball fuel the NCAA. If they go to court, who do you think has more money to go with an appeals here? Of course, it's the schools. It's Michigan, Ohio State, all those schools. And this is just another example of the failure of the NCAA. The fact that they came out and said, we could have given them a postseason ban, but we chose not to because it would have hurt the players now versus the players that were there. That's just not how things should work. Do I think Michigan should have been punished for the next 20 years? No. Do I think they're even going to make a postseason this year? No. So give them the ban anyways, just to make it look like, listen, you really cheated. You can't compete for the national championship for a year or two, and here's these fines. And I think as a non-Michigan fan like myself, I would have felt like, okay, justice was served to the best of the ability, and they didn't even strip them of their wins. They didn't strip them of the national championship. I was never a proponent of that because, listen, the games were played. Michigan won. We don't know the depth in those later games of kind of how much this really was playing into it. We know it was much earlier on in the season. So I'm not one to go out there and say they should have stripped it. And let's be real, stripping it does absolutely nothing anyways. So that's kind of my take on this Michigan situation. I really think they should just accept it, walk away. They got off light. They got off easy, which I didn't expect anything else. I was somewhat hopeful that maybe there'd be some more integrity here for the NCAA, but it just doesn't exist. It's sad to see. Still going to tune in to watch college football, but rumors this week too that they want to expand the March Madness tournament again. Again, dollars, money, money, money. And that's just all that this is about. If we're going to get to that point, I would rather that, maybe we just acknowledge that that's what this is about and operate like professional football does. Like I've been saying for years, have contracts, have, kind of commitment from both sides. And maybe we should just acknowledge what this is versus trying to pretend it's something that it's not. So all in all, that's kind of the summary of kind of what happened in the Michigan scandal. Some of these details in here were, absolutely crazy. Just one stat here that I want to read here. Let me find this. So it says Stalions, a low-level recruiter staffer, allegedly created a network of individuals he called the KGB, right? So he would have all these people that would essentially, he purchased tickets to over 30 games at 11 different Big Ten schools over 3 years, spending more than $35,000 in 2022 alone. I'm sure he had that type of money all by himself. Harbaugh. And these spies would attend the games, film the sidelines of future Michigan opponents to decipher their play calling. And then he would, this whole Central Michigan thing. He was on the sideline, which everybody clearly knew. Shout out Mount Pleasant. Was just up there for a golf tournament, like I said, with my buddies. Really nice football stadium. But anyways, just the fact that he was on the sidelines and it came out that he was also trying to help out a friend with play calls for Central Michigan, which Central Michigan stunk under Jim McElwain anyway, so clearly they knew plays and it didn't help them at all. But anyway, just some really random stuff here. Just the comments too on Michigan, how they just really, that there was just so much fraud. Michigan's a repeat, violator status, sufficient grounds for a multi-year postseason ban. They thought it would unfairly penalize students, like I said. So they moved away from shifting from punishing the entire program toward only the individuals responsible. I get it. I don't want a quarterback today to be punished on Michigan necessarily because of what happened. But when it is this big and this important and it impacts this integrity of the game, I think you had to act. You had to act swiftly, and I just don't think a fine was enough. So that's it. I rest my case. Don't want to talk about it anymore. We'll see what happens with this appeal. We're on to bigger and better things. Michigan won the Natty. Congratulations, Michigan fans. You got it. Yes, there was some cheating involved. You took it a little bit too far. You bent the rules. You broke the rules. It is what it is. Okay. Whew. I feel better getting that out. I had to get that out. I really wish Steve was here to kind of go back and forth on this. I know what his response would have been. Well, everybody's doing it. Okay. Well, not everybody was clearly doing it, but fair. Let's jump into, I think, something we're all hungry and thirsty for. Can we talk about the Lions? Guys, we are 2 weeks away here from 2 to 3 weeks away here from NFL season kicking off, which is insane. I haven't watched a ton of the preseason, probably caught maybe 3 or 4 quarters of, the 12 quarters of football that we've had. It gets really tough at the end of those games. But so Lions training camp in full swing. They played the Hall of Fame game, of course. And then they played 2 games since then. And they have their final game coming up this upcoming weekend. I believe it's against the Texans. I think they have a joint practices coming up this week as well. Been listening to a lot of Dan Campbell press conferences. And for all of you trying to, kind of plug back into the NFL, I just wanted to give you some kind of update storylines coming out of Lions training camp. Some of them you may have heard, some of them you may have not have heard. So let's just kind of jump into those. First is really, if you look at kind of some of the biggest question mark, coming into Lions training camp, one of them has been the offensive line, right? The departure of Frank Ragnow, Kevin Zeitler is also gone. Pretty much a complete reworking of, the center position and the right and left guard. Kind of how it's shaken out right now is initially it was going to be Tate Ratledge was going to be taking center snaps. People thought with Glasgow and Christian Mahogany kind of working the right and left side. Then obviously Decker and Sewell. Ratledge worked a lot at the center position in kind of spring, the OTAs, a little bit of starters training camp, but they ultimately realized that the best path for them to take was to have Graham Glasgow start at center. So he will be the starting center this year with Tate Ratledge and Christian Mahogany will be starting at right and left guard alongside him. And then of course the bookend tackles there too. So overall, it was a rough start to training camp. I know kind of their first couple practices, I think they had an Aiden Hutchinson rule in there because Taylor Decker was out, where if he even blew up the play because he was just roasting Dan Skipper and Manu, that they would just let the play continue on. But it sounds like they've really gelled together in practice coming out of Miami, which is great news. So that is going to be kind of the starting offensive line. Depth there is definitely going to be a potential concern, where you kind of had, Graham or Christian last year kind of floating in the background in case somebody got hurt. You're not going to have that flexibility this year. So there is some talk, kind of what's that backup guard spot going to look like. Dan Skipper will be your backup kind of swing tackle. And then you have Manu in there as well, kind of a developmental pick. So overall offensive line, I think hopefully coming together in training camp. The other big one has been the rise of Isaac TeSlaa. So Isaac TeSlaa, as many of you know, was a third round pick this year for the Lions. We ultimately gave up 3 third-round picks to pick this kid. Was not projected to go high. I believe he played at Arkansas. Was not a pass-heavy college scheme. A lot of runs as well. Never had a quarterback. Reality is this guy's turning some heads. This kid's turning some heads in training camp so far. I believe he's making some national headlines too around he's going to be a kind of a fantasy sleeper pick for fantasy football out there. Kid's pretty tall. He's got great hands. Given how much they gave up for him, you gave up essentially both of our third rounders next year. One was a comp pick from the Aaron Glenn leaving, and then gave up 1 this year, and then again 2 your own pick next year. So 3 picks. So, for a team that was relatively set at the wide receiver position, we felt like this was a glory pick here, a pick out of want versus a pick out of need, given some of the other issues. But he's been great. He's looked great in the games. He's been high pointing the ball. There's kind of some thoughts today around, what's going to happen to that 5th, 6th receiver spot. We re-signed Tim Patrick. He's been hurt most of camp. Could TeSlaa rise above him, kind of take that one of those last receiver spots? We'll see what happens, but Isaac TeSlaa has been a huge bright spot coming out of training camp. Who he's been receiving the ball from has probably been the other kind of biggest headline coming out of training camp, which is, in my opinion, the Hendon Hooker days have come and have gone. I'm calling receipts. Knew it when we picked him. If Steven Wilson were here, they would just be all over this because they know how much I did not like that Hendon Hooker pick from day one. I felt like you're drafting a guy in the 3rd, 4th round. Very rare that those quarterbacks ever make it. Even the ones in the 1st round hardly ever make it. But that's what they wanted to do. That's what they did. And he's looked horrible. Right? Was kind of hurt that first year. Last year he was your backup, and they ended up bringing Teddy Bridgewater in before the playoffs even started. And then this year he has a competition going on with Kyle Allen, and all signs early in camp was Hooker looked good. He looked great. He was throwing the ball well, was good under pressure, and just playing in these games, he just has looked horrible. Right? He's fumbled the ball a couple times. Yes, he moves in the pocket, but when you move in the pocket and you can't complete a pass, it kind of nullifies the idea of even running in the pocket. I think it was the second game when he did run. He started that first half, in that second game, I think he fumbled twice, and Dan Campbell yanked him, which is odd in the preseason. Kyle Allen was supposed to get the second half. He ended up coming in at the end of the second quarter, actually, and led him on a touchdown drive. So reality is this was this was a wasted pick. Hendon Hooker never has turned into what people thought he was going to be. There was calls, if you remember early on, to bench Jared Goff for Hendon Hooker. Where are those people now? Listen, at the time of the pick, what's the counter argument? It was a guy that would have gone higher in the draft, coming out of Tennessee, tore his knee up. Sure. Weren't sure if Jared Goff was going to be the guy. Fine. I disagree with it. I felt there was other players you could have taken at the time that the Lions could have used and could use right now. Whatever. They didn't do it. They sat on this guy for a year. Last 2 years, he has not played well in his minimal action. Do I think he might be a quarterback somewhere else? Sure. But everything I've seen to this point has said, we got to cut this guy. I think Kyle Allen's done a really nice job. Surprisingly, had a rough kind of first start to that first preseason game, but he's looked poised. He's a veteran. He started a season essentially in the NFL, I think, for the Panthers. So he's got some, kind of live fire underneath him. And I think he should be the backup. And just from a pure roster spot perspective, I think it's time to let Hendon Hooker go. I wish we would have maybe taken somebody else, but it is what it is. Backup quarterback is always the most debated discussion because it's always who's next, who's going to come in. Reality is, if Jared Goff goes down, the Lions season is over. If he's down for a prolonged period of time, the Lions season is over. Can Kyle Allen come in for a game or two, a quarter or two? Sure. That's what you want from your backup quarterback. Come in and give me a competent chance to win. And I think Kyle Allen is best suited to do that over a guy like Hendon Hooker. So we'll see what kind of shakes out there. The other one is really on that defensive line. So as you guys know, the injury bug has actually followed the Lions, unfortunately, into camp. I wish that wasn't the case. Just this past week, Ahmed Hassan, who was their 6th round pick, Dan Campbell said today is going to miss, significant time. This is in addition to Dan Jackson, who I think was their 7th round, safety pick. He's also out for the year. But they've definitely had some injuries that have popped up this year. Just taking a step back, I don't know what it is about these Lion injury reports or these Lions injury issues that have popped up. Because, you take a second to think like, okay, last year was just insane, right? Aiden Hutchinson breaks his leg, just very fluky injuries that happen. And then you look this year to start a camp, right? It's, Rakestraw went down like 3 times. Eventually he tears his pec. He's out for the year. It sounds like I said, Hassan looks like he hurt his pec. Pec injuries are tough. We know, with CJ Gardner-Johnson, that's a tough thing to really kind of come back from, which is challenging. And we have a lot of injuries still kind of working their way out. Aleem McNeil still not back yet. Wingo's on the PUP list, still not back yet. Josh Paschal has not practiced yet. Malcolm Rodriguez is still on the PUP from his ACL. Miles Frazier also on the PUP. They just have had some really brutal injuries on this defense still, even coming into training camp, that it just makes you wonder, why is that? And I think they were talking about this maybe on Locked On Lions or one of the local podcasts. I thought it was a really interesting conversation around, why do the Lions players get so hurt? Is it strength and nutrition? Is it, they're just going too hard? Is it that they're drafting guys that are just injury prone? It just feels like every day it's something popping up. And, I kind of equate this to just, anybody ever get a pimple out there, right? You ever get a pimple out there and, you think everyone's looking at the pimple and then no one is, and then you call it out and now all of a sudden everyone's like, oh yeah, wow, this guy's got a huge pimple. That's what I equate this to, in that all these injuries are happening. No one's thinking about it, whatever. It's football. Guys get hurt. Once you call it out and realize like, man, a lot of dudes are getting hurt, you start to then get this sensitivity to it to, oh no, right? Every time someone goes down, is he getting up? Is he out? Is he hurt? And I think last year's kind of done that to us. It's like the Tigers bullpen back in the day, right? You'd be like, oh boy, look out. Here we go again, right? Going to give up a home run. That's kind of how we feel with what's going on with the Lions injuries here. I don't know the answer of why it's happening. I think Dan Campbell is just a damn good motivator. And I think he's got these guys playing tough and they're playing hard in this sport. Football is a violent sport. And I think guys just get hurt. And that is what it is. There's not much you can do about it. This is where depth comes into play. And, I think the Lions have a really strong starting team. I think their depth is where this season will be a challenge if these injuries continue, right? Because if you look at all of their positions just across the board, they have a great starter at darn near every position. Offensive line, sure. You got a rookie up there, fair. Christian Mahogany hasn't started much. Okay, fine. You want to go defensive side, okay, DJ Reader, great. You got Tyleik Williams starting in the center. Obviously, a rookie there starting when Aleem McNeil comes back. There'll just be more depth. But really outside of that, linebackers are strong. The corners are relatively strong. Your quarterback's strong. Your running back room's great. Your receivers room's great. It's really those depth pieces is where it comes into play, right? If a safety goes down, if Joseph or Branch goes down, don't have a ton of backup there, right? If one of your starting guards go down, like I said, don't have a ton of backup there. This is what I think is going to be fascinating with Brad Holmes moving forward is as you learn to build these roster with these higher paid guys, your draft picks become even more important here and your ability to sign kind of lower price guys that you think can contribute and fill those roles is what is going to make or break a football season because these guys are just going to get hurt. And so I think as we look to training camp, the Lions of their 53-man roster, I bet they got 51 of it figured out. Who's going to be the seventh receiver? Is Zadarius Smith going to make a return? And does that push, Nate Lynn and one of these defensive guys out of the rotation or maybe not on the team? Sure. But this team is going to win or lose based on their guys up front and can they stay healthy enough throughout the year to be in there for 75% of the time? It's too early to say what that's going to be, but as we look in these next week or two, I think the first cuts are coming tomorrow, and then obviously final cuts will come next week. Will be just kind of how does the depth end up shaking out for the Lions? Do they end up picking up some guys from other teams to try to build that out? Because I think Brad Holmes has been pretty darn good in the regular season as finding, picking up guys off of other people's scrap piles and, playing them on this team. Like Al Qudin Muhammad last year came in and was awesome. They've had these random people that have come in and played extremely well, and we'll just have to see if that continues this year. So, a lot of injuries coming out of training camp. The big ones to be on the lookout for is, Sam Laporta has been out. Terry Arnold's been working his way back. Kirby Joseph has been out with some knee issues. Taylor Decker's missed most of training camp as well. He had some cleanup, I think, in the summer, so he's working his way back. Those are kind of the guys that you're watching that are currently hurt to make sure that they're good to go here in the next 2 to 3 weeks. Other than that, at this point, it's get to the starting line healthy. They say the greatest skill is availability, right? Or the greatest ability is availability, I should say. That's going to be really important for this team. All signs in training camp, for those that haven't played close attention, is, Aiden Hutchinson looks great. Like I said, he's playing really well. Jamison Williams and Amon-Ra St. Brown have been playing awesome. You're seeing a ton of highlight videos, which again is expected. It's training camp. They're going to kind of hype each other up. But the defense has been playing well too. They're going up against, a good offense on the other side with the Lions. So those are kind of big takeaways from training camp. So like I said, Hendon Hooker, we'll see what happens there. Isaac Tesla sounds like he's really going to be a contributor. Other big thing is we'll see what happens over the next couple of weeks. Does a guy like Zadarius Smith get brought back to the Lions? I'd be remiss, guys, if we didn't talk about Trey Hendrickson for the Bengals. Available in a trade. Lions are, I think, the second favorite team for him to play for. I think it's Bengals 1. Obviously, he's on the Bengals. Carolina Panthers 2, and I believe the Lions are plus 800. I think the Panthers are plus 600 in terms of betting odds. So, people think there's a chance that he's going to come to Detroit. One guy's point of view, I don't think that's going to happen based on what we know from Brad Holmes. I don't think it's something that he believes in. He's got $46 million in extra cap space right now. He has not spent. He's not going to. They're going to save that for next year because that rolls over and they got a ton of money due. But, news today out of Cincinnati is that, Hendrickson's available. The Bengals are starting to listen. Sounds like they want a, high draft pick plus a young defensive player. I heard them talking on the radio today. Hey, we're going to give you a second round pick and Jack Campbell, for example, for a guy like Hendrickson. Like, if that's the asking price, the Lions are not ever going to do that. Dude's going to make whatever it is, 15, 20 mil this year. He's going to want an extension. I wish it would happen. I think he would be an absolute stud to have here. You get a guy like him, Aiden Hutchinson, and Marcus Davenport kind of in a rotation, right? With Davenport coming in on some of those downs to give those two guys a breather. I mean, that's an elite defensive line. I just think you run into issues if you do that. You're turning a strength, and then all of a sudden that strength's becoming a weakness if you trade one of your young guys like Brian Branch or Jack Campbell. I just don't see them doing that. The only way I could potentially see this shaking out is if the Lions ultimately want to wiggle away with a first-round pick and say, hey, we're going to give up a first-round pick, hope he plays this year on kind of his one-year deal, and then see what happens next year. Maybe he walks. You get a compensatory pick from him walking, and that's what we do. I would love to see them go after him because I think he could be a game changer. It's just knowing what I know, knowing what you all know about Brad Holmes. This just doesn't feel like it's his type of move. He's shown no aggressiveness to really want to go all in for any type of free agency or trade. He'll do it in the draft when he sees a guy that he likes. But, as much as I would like to see this happen, I just don't see it. We'll see. Maybe I'll be surprised. Maybe this is a Brad Holmes, hey, you think I'm playing checkers, I'm playing chess situation, and he ends up making a move. Would love to see it. Would really kind of open up that Super Bowl window for the Lions, maybe even more if you can get him re-signed. But with Hutch's deal, the salary cap piece, I just don't see it happening. But had to call that out. Let's hope he doesn't go to the Bears or the Packers or one of these other teams in the division. Fine. You want to go to the Panthers? No problem. Want to go to the Colts? Fantastic. Have fun. Good luck. But I hope he kind of stays out of our division. So that's kind of my summary on Lions training camp. We'll kind of jump into, I think, season expectations here too. I really want to jump into college football these next couple weeks. Just kind of what we're thinking for Michigan State as we look to the college football season. And yeah, not really much else going on from that in the world of sports. Like I said, Tigers 7-3 in their last 10. Big series coming up against Houston. The playoffs are inching closer and closer. Hopefully they can keep this up. But yeah, we talked a lot of baseball this year, so not going to talk anymore today. But yeah, so that's it. Hope you guys enjoyed this pod. I know it was kind of fast paced and quick, but just wanted to get on here and just give some initial thoughts about the Michigan scandal, kind of the outcome of that, talk a little Lions, and just kind of see where we're at out of training camp. So make sure, as always, rate, review, subscribe to the podcast. We're going to get a bit better at getting the stuff out on Instagram and getting the YouTube channels up. Reality is we're three dudes living lives, working jobs, and we do our best to keep up with this the best that we can in terms of posting on social media, but we try to be here every week. We will be moving forward with football starting. So yeah, like I said, rate, review, subscribe. This has been great. Thank you all for being passionate listeners to Take the Points. We will see you next time on another episode of Take the Points, a true underdog podcast. Go Tigers, baby.